What I usually think about when I think about diversity in the soil is I think about actively aerated compost teas. But before we get to that as a bigger topic, I just want to remind people and talk a little bit about the idea of facultative anaerobes, which are basically things that can operate in oxygen and out of oxygen-rich environments. Now, a lot of people think once you reduce the oxygen, and rightly so, there's a lot more pathogentic activity that can happen. But some species are actually good at going back and forth and can provide good value to the plant.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, products have been produced for a long time using these types of organisms. And there is a tradition in East Asia, specifically out of Korea, of these effective microorganisms. And they are basically culturing these organisms in an anaerobic environment, right? And sometimes they would be, burying a bucket out in the forest and filling it up with sugary water and rotting fruits, and then just letting it sit out there and letting it be colonized by whatever microbes fall into it from the forest.
Sure. Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting because essentially what we are talking about is fermentation. In that case, slightly less structured than you'd expect on a good beer, but similar process, right? So there is that whole chain of activity that can be really beneficial to plants. But I really want to go beyond that to that actively aerated product, which is basically aerobic in nature, meaning that it's full of oxygen and oxygen using organisms. So when we talk about an actively aerated compost tea, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so that's actually what you're doing is you're culturing or you're reproducing the organism. So you're trying to create a biologically dense solution, right? So you're usually using either compost or worm castings or insect frass, and then you're bubbling it in water. So you're making sure that you're adding enough oxygen to keep it aerated, because let's face it, most of those organisms living in the soil, all the beneficial ones and such, they're living in an aerobic environment. That means with oxygen, right? So in that case, we are culturing organisms that are going to thrive once they're applied to the, your soil or your growing mix.
Yep.
And by doing that aerating and bubbling is actually, you're just reproducing. So yeah, one of the key things is oxygenation of the solution.
Yeah, so we've got sort of that inoculant material that you suggested 3 different options for. You've got a lot of oxygen, and then in general you're going to look at 2 different things, almost like sort of stimulants like molasses, and then sort of broader food sources like maybe some kelp or some different grain meals to target different organisms within that brew system.
Yeah, exactly. And just like you and I need a balanced diet, so do the microbes, right? And not only are we reproducing them, but we want them to continue to thrive, right? And different organisms have different dietary needs, so definitely how you feed your compost tea while you're brewing it is going to affect your species composition and the abundance of those species in it.
If you just feed, like a lot of people talk about molasses, but if you just put molasses into a tea brewing system, you're really just looking at bacteria, because they're so much faster than fungi at finding quick sugar, right, and accessing that quickly. So a good quality tea product will also have additional food sources that bacteria might overlook while they're focused on the molasses, and slow and steady fungi can come in and actually replicate a little bit in that 24-hour brewing period as well.
Yeah, certainly. And we've talked about filling niches and not providing a space for pathogenic species to enter. And so, an activated compost tea, you're basically applying all those functional groups to your growing media and hoping that they take hold and they fill these different niches, and that they can work together to help make nutrients more available, to stimulate, growth of your plants, to induce resistance to pests and disease.
Yeah, really the benefits are just so wide-ranging.